G'day! Today we're going to be building a city in Cities Skylines 2. We'll be exploring all the new features and tools in the new game whilst on the road to reach the Grand Village milestone. Now, this is actually the tale of two cities, because the first one that I built, I ended up ditching it. It was making money, people were happy, had good infrastructure, but it just wasn't the Grand Village of my dreams. This one didn't work, but this one works. And I'll explain why in this video. But a big chunky part of it was that you can unlock rail infrastructure at the Grand Village milestone only if you're strategic. And I wasn't. And I want my Grand Village to feel real, with strong rail infrastructure threading our town, and most importantly, a great starting place for a large city. Because down the track, that's what it's going to be, a large city. As we dive through some of the new tools and features of the game, I'm going to talk about the things that I am absolutely loving about it, and then a couple of concerns that I have, because I do have them, and I like to talk about those problems when they arise and get a little bit of feedback from you guys. But then also the things that you love, because there is a lot to love about Cities Skylines 2. We are going to be diving right into this game over the next couple of weeks and beyond. And if all that sounds good, and if you haven't subscribed yet, then this would probably be a great time to do so, because we're going to be chipping away at this little city for the next couple of weeks, maybe even a little bit longer. We'll see how things go, but this episode is going to be the most important one. So let's just get on up then. If you've played Cities Skylines 1, then the main menu feels a little bit familiar, maybe a little bit cozy. Also, new Dolitons in the background. That's kind of nice. But we're starting a brand new one, so hitting on the new game menu opens up a whole bunch of different maps to choose from. I want to build something pretty different to new Dolitons, so I decided to go for something nestled in between all these mountains, a little lake, and plenty of natural resources to choose from. I can also see here that there is a rail connection going into our starting square, so this is perfect. For our city theme, I'm going to choose the North American one. I'm also deciding to leave natural disasters on. I'm going to regret this later. And then for the city name, this is always a challenging one, so I don't know yet, I'll decide in a little bit. For everything else, I'm going to leave unchecked. We're going to be progressing through the milestones, unlocking different features and tools as we progress, so everything else is pretty good to go. The starting tile on our map gives us access to some pretty good features for starting out a new city. I'm a big fan of our highway connection. Rather than being a big chunky highway, it's more of a little road, which I think is a much better starting place when you're starting out as a little town. We do have a very non-North American roundabout here, but you know what, I can live with that. The rest of the map is absolutely beautiful with these big mountains on either side of our river. I particularly love this little island that sits on the fork of this river. We'll have to do something with this. I'm a big fan of the trees in Cities Skylines 2, these look amazing. And then for our starting square, we've also got access to the water, which we're absolutely going to use. But then for our train line, it is not in a great location. I would have much rather this thing going through the heart of it. So this is going to make things a little bit more tricky. Opening up the progression panel for the first time, you can see some of the different tools that are locked and then some of the ones that we already have access to. We're going to have to gain some development points. This is the way that you can unlock these different features and work through the different chains as you develop up your city. You gain these points by building up your city, placing roads and services, and making the citizens happy. We've also got the milestones. We're going to be playing all the way through the different villages, all the way up to Grand Village. The first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that the land was absolutely how I wanted it to look before we started to place the roads. Thankfully, this is free. With all these mountains around, I feel like there'd be little channels where the water would trickle off through. And then for the land around the water, I felt like that was just a little bit too raised up. So I decided to flatten it out a little bit, keeping it pretty close to level to the river. I also want to test out just how well we can make a little stream in Cities Skylines 2. This is something that's pretty challenging in Cities Skylines 1, so I want to give this a little test run. Eventually, I can see this little stream snaking its way throughout our city, but at the moment, it's just going to be snaking around it. It's going to end its journey at the foothills of some of the largest mountains on the map. We'll continue to work on this little stream throughout this episode, but for now, the bare bones are down. It's now time for the fun part. The funnest part for me when it comes to city building is probably the road layout. It's always fun imagining just how our city is going to take shape and change as we progress through the milestones, and how the initial road layout is going to affect the way that it changes. And when it comes to expanding out our city, I don't really like to change the roads too much, because I like to try and use the pre-existing infrastructure and try and make it so that it feels like it's been developed on over time. So all the things that we're doing right now is really important. They will influence the way that the city develops and the way that it will end up looking. So as I lay down these roads and figure out how this is going to take shape, I'm really thinking about what this city is going to look like down the track. And that's pretty hard, but also a lot of fun. All the music that you're listening to in this video is in fact from the Cities Skylines 2 radio station, which is probably one of my favorite parts about this game. Some of the music is just so beautiful and fits so well when it comes to city building, but then the presenters talking about different things that are happening throughout your city is just so nice. It really just adds to that world building of your city being a real place. Even though it's not, it really does feel like it. This game feels so dynamic and so different from the original, and I will continue to talk about this throughout this episode, and you will be listening to more Cities Skylines 2 music throughout this video, but then I might just also sprinkle in a little bit of Sims 1 build music, because I can't help myself. After a little bit of zoning in the heart of the town, I designated a separate spot for our dirty industry. This is common practice in Cities Skylines that also applies to Cities Skylines 2. But a cheeky little technique when it comes to power, rather than building some expensive power plant, just hook into the outside connection. This way you don't actually have to build any of those things. Later down the track, we will end up building a power station, but for now, this works well. And with that, it was time to get this show on the road. As pretty as these day and night visuals are, I decided to turn them off because we are fast forwarding through quite a lot of the different progressions through these early stages of our little town. Speaking of which, we're developing up quite nicely with our residents slowly starting to move in, and then all of a sudden we hit our very first milestone, Tiny Village. We unlocked a couple of fun new features, but the thing that I was most looking forward to was medium density row housing. When it comes to row housing, there is a little bit of a technique that does help to make things feel just a little bit more realistic. It does take a little bit of extra time, but I do think the payoff is definitely well worth it. If you zone the entire block, you end up getting buildings of all different sizes. Now that doesn't make a huge amount of sense when it comes to row houses. Plus, you want all the houses to be facing the same direction, and of equal size. So for me, I like to zone just on one side first, but not zoning on the corners, because I also want them to be facing the same direction. Once those buildings have developed up, you can then zone on the other side. For some of these blocks, I left in a little bit of room for an alleyway, but I gotta wait for these buildings to develop and then we'll add that later. And with all that new development, it just felt like the right time to finally name our town and future city. And there was a word, a name that was screaming out to me every single time I looked down at our toolbar. Dun Yeti. I don't know why, that word just stood out to me every time I looked down there. And you know, Dun Yeti has already changed so much throughout this video. But over the next minute, we're about to transform Dun Yeti into a grand village. But don't worry, I'm not just about to speedrun my entire build. All this, everything you see me building right now, I'm not going to keep any of this. All this is the grand village that I built that I just wasn't that satisfied with. It just wasn't what I wanted. For starters, I ended up building this suburb out of Dun Yeti onto this little hillside, and there's nothing wrong with the way that this looks, but it just feels like I've branched out of the town just a little bit too quickly. Almost like I missed a couple of steps. This doesn't really reflect what a tiny village looks like. So this was a bit of a mistake, but it wasn't the biggest. Nor was the fact that I built these windy roads up on this hillside. I didn't really know what the plan was with this, but they looked pretty random, a little bit strange. But this still wasn't the reason why I restarted. I then unlocked a couple of high density apartment blocks. These were pretty good for holding more people. I really liked the fact that I created this cheap housing block in this little space. I like the way this turned out, but it did feel a little bit too big for a grand village. So I wasn't too fond about this decision. However, there was something bothering me just a little bit more. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I wanted my town to be based around rail infrastructure. Well, you can only unlock that if you use your development points to unlock it. Well, I'd already spent on mine. And the thing is, at the end of each one of these videos that I end up releasing, when I hit these big milestones, I want my city to feel exactly how that milestone looks. And this is a grand village, and I want there to be rail infrastructure. So that bothered me. But you know what bothered me even more? The fact that my grand village just didn't really feel like a grand village. it didn't feel real. And my goal for this was to make a grand village that felt real and realistic, but something was missing. You know what was missing? Trees. Trees in Cities Skylines 2 aren't just placed down fully grown. You have to wait for them to grow, and they take a really long time. So if you want trees in your city, then you need to invest in them very early on, which I did not. So let's try this again. This time round, I needed to get the landscape exactly how I wanted it to look, including the trees. I ended up buying a couple of extra blocks of land. Truly, absolutely terrible choices in blocks of land to buy, but I chose them just so I could landscape the land just that little bit extra. It also meant that I needed to get rid of the power line and the train line that was kind of in the way. Also not recommended. I am going to be extending these out so that they go all the way through the city. This makes more sense. Dunyeti was actually making some pretty good money, which is good because all the stuff that I was about to do was going to be very, very expensive. However, this definitely needed to be done. I did also have a bit of a trick up my sleeve. It was just taxing the people, but you can tax them quite a lot, and they were okay about this. So that's pretty good. I got back to terraforming, extending out our little stream so that it went all the way out to the foothills of this mountain and going into this little ridge that leads all the way up to the tallest mountain on the map. It's going to take a little while for the water to fill into the stream, but when it does, it's going to look really nice, especially when it's paired with some beautiful trees. I wanted to stay consistent with the types of trees already growing on the map. Clicking on the trees, you can see we got alder, we got spruce, we got pine. These are the types of trees that I was going to choose to use. Now, when it comes to tree placement, this is very similar to Cities Skylines 1. It's pretty good. I wish we had a forest brush tool, that would be fantastic, but I am relying on some mods or maybe some updates down the track that will give us a couple of extra tools when it comes to terraforming and adding trees and creating natural environments, which does lead me to the thing that I am probably the most concerned about when it comes to Cities Skylines 2, and that's the way that you can create and change the landscape. Over the years in Cities Skylines 1, we found ways of making it so that we can use the natural resources and mods to change the way that the landscape looked, changing the color and changing the resources. And we could use those resources to create deserts, to create swamps, just to create different types of textures within our cities and between our cities. And that is probably something that I'm missing the most with this, is that we don't at this stage, and I have to really emphasize at this stage, seem to have anything that allows us to change the color of the ground. And that for me is very tricky because that's how I create a little bit more realism around these places. For me, in between cities, in between towns, are probably the thing that I am most passionate about. I love creating those places, those natural environments, and you can create some really amazing natural environments in Cities Skylines 2, as you can see with these mountains and the trees and the water. You know, this all looks great. But the fact that you can't change the ground color at this stage, I'm a little bit concerned about. Now, this was something that was achieved with mods, and it wasn't perfect in Cities Skylines 1 because it meant that whatever ground color you ended up using, it meant that that's what resource was under there. And that's not perfect, especially if you're trying to play with the game mechanics. But we actually don't have any ground color for any of the natural resources, which means that we don't actually have those tools to use. So it does make me wonder how we're going to be able to change the ground colors and make different types of environments if we don't have those tools. I'm hoping that they get implemented some other way, or maybe this is something that's going to happen down the track. But at this stage, it does make things a little bit limited because we are all basically using the same texture. We've all got this grass, we've all got the same mountains. So it does make me a little bit nervous. However, I do have to remember that I am playing with a game that's not released yet, and I'm also playing a game that is brand new. When Cities Skylines 1 first came out, I never would have dreamed of changing the ground color. Whereas with Cities Skylines 2, they've changed and implemented so many different features that I never would have dreamed of. And I also believe that the core game has improved dramatically in areas that I didn't even think we really needed that many improvements on. Oh, I was wrong. Now I can't go back. But we will just have to wait and see how the game changes over the next couple of months when the full game gets released, see what happens with updates, and see what mods end up coming out. Cities Skylines 1 changed dramatically over the years, so I expect the same to happen with Cities Skylines 2. I think it's in good hands, but at this stage, playing with this pre-release, I am a little bit nervous about the lack of changing ground color. But we'll just have to wait and see. But after that big tree bonanza, it's time to hit save, again. Because we're about to make some big town changes, and I needed some big trees to be there. I wanted there to be a big city park in the center of Dun Yeti. Whenever I've got a weird shape in the road layout, these are the perfect spots to make these parks. This is sort of the reason why I make these. By placing down all these trees early on, I can then wait for them to grow and then go back through and delete some of the ones that I don't really want anymore. My absolutely favorite part about this park is this path that continues the same layout of the road. I love that. I then continued to flesh out the road layout of the city, thinking about where some of these roads were going to go. I'm dragging out a couple of dirt ones, they're a little bit cheaper, but then I also like to keep these sometimes, to kind of show that these are dirt roads and they will eventually be these main roads. I think this makes more sense when you're creating a village. As I'm playing down extra parts of Dun Yeti, I'm also trying to make sure that I'm placing down the trees. I want the trees in the middle of the town to be very well established by the time we hit the Grand Village milestone. I'm also trying not to develop too much, because the more I develop, the more XP I get, and the closer I get to that Grand Village. That also means that I need to keep the happiness fairly low. Taxing these people quite a lot is going to help, but I'm also not giving the town much room to grow. These guys are desperate for more zoning, but I'm not going to do that right now. This is a tree game. The town will come later. Sorry buckos, but we are all about trees. You guys have to wait. Nothing's going to stop us. No, oh, that's right. As it turns out, fire can be a little bit of a bummer. Thankfully, I was saving quite regularly, so every time the town would burn down, I could just go back and, reload. You can also go through and demolish some of the trees that are on fire, so that also helps. Not even a deadly mountain tornado can get in our way. This town was destined for some trees. Not even Mother Nature can get in our way. Oh wait, that doesn't make any sense. Alright, so this was taking quite a long time, but by the time the trees were looking fairly well established, we'd already hit the Grand Village milestone, and with snow starting to form on the mountains around our little town, it was probably about time that we got to that train line. Are you guys still watching this? It's because I promised trains. That was smart of me, wasn't it? For the train lines, I wanted to make sure that we had a whole bunch that were serving different purposes around our little town. This one on the water edge, I wanted to make sure that this was something that was going to be serving the industry of the town and eventually would be serving a little bit more of the factories that sat around here. But for now, it's just stretching around the town. It's making its journey across a little bridge, over the stream, heading towards the only industry that we have at this stage. But this wouldn't be the only line going through the town. This one bypasses it, pretty much. We're going to have one that goes all the way through it. And this little fork in the line, this is the line that's going to go through it. But before I got to that, there was something I still needed to figure out. It wasn't really sitting well with me, the fact that we just had one road stretching across the bridge that connected up to the highway. It sort of felt like we needed a couple of extra ones heading in other directions. So I wanted to figure out where some of the other roads were going to go. These are other highways, they're going to be stretching out towards other towns. Not that we're going to be building these towns, but I do like to imagine that these are heading out in those directions. And there's the same for the train line. The train line is also connecting this town up to other ones. I also like to get a good idea of the main roads that would have been the establishing roads of this town. These will eventually be much larger roads down the track, but for now, they're just roads that are going into other directions, giving a good sense of the grounding of this town amongst the other places that would be around here. Now, you might be thinking that I am wasting a whole bunch of money just dragging a bunch of highways in directions that have no connection, and I am. I mean, I don't know if I recommend this, but for me, I do need to have some sort of grounding elements that make it feel like my town or city is connected to other things, not just itself sitting in a field, not really connected to anything besides one highway. It just doesn't feel that real to me. By doing this, it feels like it's a little bit more grounded, and eventually then we can extend out and add extra bits and pieces like industry or other towns. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but in my mind, I at least like to imagine that that's going to be there. But speaking of industry, I wanted to fix up the industry that sat on the other side of the stream where that train line was heading towards. I don't love this, but I do love the fact that we do have a train line heading in this direction. There's no cargo terminal at this stage, But when our city gets a little bit bigger, maybe in the next episode, then we'll do that. I'm also stretching out another train line. This is following a little stream heading towards what's going to be farming industry. This whole area around the stream, I'm imagining we're going to be building some sort of parkland around here. Using some of those great new paths and placing down a couple of parks, I think this would be a nice little walkway. So I don't really know how I'm going to be using this train line there. I haven't really thought about that. You know what else I didn't really think about? Just how big these depots are. Yeah, the train depot, which is what you need to place down before you place down the train station, is pretty big. Whoops. Plop. Yeah, I'm gonna place it down anyway. I mean, we didn't just get this far just to place down a bunch of train lines. We're gonna go the whole way. And I have to admit, I didn't expect for this to fit so well. I mean, this could not be a better spot to place this thing. The road layout is already pretty unusual in this area, so this gives a good reason why it's like that. And that also goes for the train station. I did have to turn off snapping so it didn't snap to the road, and I could just align it up to that train line coming from the depot. But hey, that worked pretty well. But then the fact that trains have to travel through the depot along a separate line to get to the train station is actually pretty cool. But then also stretching the train line through Dunyetti and just knowing that eventually when trees grow, buildings develop, and we get a little bit more detailing down, and even when the city becomes a little bit more like a city, the fact that we have this train line now established here is just going to be so cool. With the train line now established and a little bit of an idea of how the roads are going to interact with it, just a little bit, it was time to finish off Dunyetti into its grand village state. By that, I just wanted to figure out just how some of these roads on the outer edge of the town were really going to look. Why were they there? What's their purpose? But most importantly, figuring out some farms. At first, I was a bit disappointed because I figured I was only going to be able to place farms on fertile land. But then I realized that you can actually just place these things on regular land. That's perfect. Now, I'm not the biggest fan with how these farms look. However, I love the way that they function and I love the way that you can drag them out. This mechanic is so great, and I think we're gonna have a lot of fun with figuring out how these are going to look. But for now, I'm just sort of figuring out a general idea of these farms, playing around with some of the shapes, and most importantly, just finishing off Dunyetti. There's still so much more to do, but I did just want to finish off a couple little areas by just fixing up some of the trees that I knew I didn't want in some of those areas, and then also going through and just changing the way that some of the trees look around some of these areas. I'm still figuring out the best way to place these down, but I do think that placing them down in little clusters is definitely the way to go, but it's always best just to place down a whole bunch at first, and then you can figure out how that's going to look a little bit later. Now, there are still some trees in some areas that aren't really ideal. We do have a lot of cleaning up to do, but we'll get to that. Because you know what? This isn't it for Dunyetti. In fact, this is just the beginning. Hey guys, thank you all so much for watching today's video. Woo-wee! I am not looking forward to editing this one. Oh man. Alright, but guys, thank you all so much for watching. We got so much more to do. This probably could have been like 7 videos, but I was only allowed to release one, and I had to keep it under 30 minutes. And I'm looking at my Premiere Pro timeline and it says 1 hour and 37 minutes. Yeah, it's gonna be a big old editing session. I want to give a big shout out to my patrons who give me the energy to stay up late editing videos. Ian Ames, Jamie, Jonathan, Nigel, Ben Service, Nace Tinsel II, YTQPYP, Donzo, Steve, Tyler Todd, X Steve, and Daniel Jazioski. Cheers legends, see you all in the next one. Goodbye.